Today, we'll be discussing the career of the late actor Gene Hackman, and we'll be discussing hantavirus infections. This is Doctor versus Comedian. I'm Dr. Asif and this is the Doctor of Laughs,
Dr. Ali Hassan, not a real doctor.
Every episode, I pick a topic for Ali from comedy and entertainment, and I question him about it. Then Ali picks a topic for medicine and health and grills me on that topic. Now, legendary actor Gene Hackman passed away recently, so today we'll be discussing his life, his career, and his films. Then we'll be discussing hantavirus infections, which is a very rare infection which can be transmitted from rodent droppings.
I will say, on the list of things that I didn't think I needed to worry about, this has now skyrocketed to the top 10 because, I watched with some interest this story about Gene Hackman's death. Both my wife and I were at different times, engaged with this story. It seemed strange. They said no foul play is suspected. And what do you think when they say no foul play is suspected?
You think it is suspected?
Yeah. Why'd you bring it up then? I wasn't thinking that. Why'd you say it? You said it. That's exactly what happened. So we were watching and we didn't know what kind of strange thing. So, some relief there that it wasn't foul play, but pretty disturbing nonetheless. And then I hear about this rodent dropping thing, and now I have a new thing to haunt my dreams. But yeah, I'm happy we're able to talk about it. You've gone and done a weekend course in rodent droppings, I believe, Asif, in preparation for this episode.
Virtually, I did that. Yeah, I learned a lot too. So why don't we start off with Gene Hackman's career, and then we can get into the sad circumstances of his death and his wife's death in the second half. Ali, I want to talk to you about Gene Hackman. We discussed offline, such a great in the history of cinema. We really need to give him his fair share and a thorough discussion of his films, especially the ones that really touched us, right? And of course, this guy, he's had 2 Academy Awards, 3 Golden Globes, numerous nominations over time. And so let's start off with a bit about his background. Then we'll go into a bit of trivia about his life. And then I want to hear your picks. And of course, I'm going to give my picks about our favorite movies and roles that he's had.
I agree with your terms and conditions, Asif Doja. Let's do it.
Okay. He's born January 30th, 1930 in California. And family moved around a lot, settled in Illinois, which is going to be relevant for some of his other movies later on, which take place in the Midwest.
Yes. Area. True story. A lot of stuff that comes back in this man's life. Also, Canadian connection, as you talk about his young life. His mother was born in good old Sarnia, Ontario, Canada. Huh?
Mm-hmm.
How do you like that? Do you know that? Do you know he had
I did not know that. Very interesting.
I don't really know how that factored into his life. Sadly, his mother died in a fire that she had accidentally started while smoking. That was when Gene Hackman was in his early 30s. It was in 1962, but that's still sad.
Yeah. And, his early life, his dad actually left his family when they were, I think Gene Hackman was 13. And then very shortly after that, he left home and enlisted in the army. And, again, that kind of military plays a role in some of his other acting roles he did later on.
He was stationed in China for some time. When communist revolutions conquered the mainland in 1949, he was reassigned to Hawaii and Japan. Now, these kind of things, mother dying, father abandoning him, enlisting in the army at the age of 16, lying about his age to be part of the Marine Corps, and then being in Southeast Asia and Asia. These are all very interesting things to me from an acting perspective. We've talked about this, the idea of use it, whatever you have, use it. This idea used to be method acting was the most important thing. So you have to become the person. But how do you really, let's say you're playing a character who murdered 11 people, and that's, you can't actually become that person lawfully. So the other thing you do is you use your imagination and your experiences to become characters. So all this stuff is feeding an actor, whether it's grief or pain or trauma. It's all stuff that feeds an actor, and usually, if worked with correctly, can make you so much of a better actor. So when we talk about, somebody's background, it is often to help shed some light on where they went and what they drew from as an actor later on.
And it's interesting. There are some quotes from him. He was told very early on that you're not going to make it in acting. This is by acting coaches, by mentors. You're not going to make it. And he just had this drive. He said, I'm going to do whatever it takes to get a job. And he still, even towards the end of his career, felt it was like me against them. You have to struggle. And he said, part of being an actor is you want to do something that you're trained in and nobody lets you do it. And you need to do whatever you can to lie, cheat, steal, in quotation marks, to get an audition, to get a job. And he still felt like that even after his Academy Awards. And so I'm curious what you think about that as an actor.
I don't know if I fully agree. Thank you for clarifying which one of us is an actor. I don't know if I fully agree with that, but I can't minimize his experiences. I found that very interesting. I read that quote also. And the other thing is, he started acting in the mid-50s. He befriended another aspiring actor, and both he and that actor were described by their classmates as they were voted the least likely to succeed. Gene Hackman and Dustin Hoffman. Anyway, so they both had this I'll show you sort of thing. And in a way, they probably would credit those classmates for some of their success. Without that underdog mentality and that I'll show you, I'm going to shut you up, you're going to see, I don't know if they would have had this success. And the other guy, and his name will come back, who was part of this trio of friends was Robert Duvall. They were described as Hackman, Hoffman, Duvall, struggling California-born actors and close friends, sharing New York apartments in various two-person combos in the 60s. That's an insane group of talented people.
Well, when it comes to Gene Hackman, we're going to talk about his roles in a second, but I just want to point out a couple of things that I didn't know, a bit of trivia about him. He also wrote several novels. These were historical fiction novels. He wrote them together with an undersea archaeologist named Daniel Lenihan. I have no idea how these guys got together, but they did. And then he even did a solo novel later on. And his last novel, Pursuit, was a police thriller released in 2013. So I didn't know that. Second thing I didn't know is he was really into architecture and design. As of 1990, he had created 10 homes, 2 of which were featured in Architectural Digest. And he just loved doing house renovations, house design. And so he's kind of like one of these guys who just is good at all these different things. And Renaissance man. Yeah, exactly. So that I thought was very interesting. I do, like I said, want to talk about his roles, but I think it's kind of interesting. There's a few roles that he did not get that I found was quite interesting. He was originally cast as Mr. Robinson in Mike Nichols' film The Graduate, 1967. But Mike Nichols fired him 3 weeks into rehearsal because he was too young for the role, which makes sense because he was a contemporary of Dustin Hoffman, right? And the whole idea was that Dustin Hoffman is with this older woman, right? So I thought that was kind of interesting.
Well, there'll be more interesting stuff coming up, Asif, because Gene Hackman will work with Mike Nichols eventually. Oh, I've said too much. But yeah, he will. He didn't get a role of Mike Brady for the TV series The Brady Bunch because he didn't accept it. His agent told him to decline it. I can't help but imagine there was a few years there. If you look up The Brady Bunch, ran for a very long time, extremely successful show. I didn't watch a ton of it, but, he was just always around. That would have made him a obscenely wealthy man very early on. Maybe that's not what motivated him, to be quite honest. But if success and money was something he was looking forward to, he probably fired that agent.
So we'll get into his roles. I mean, obviously, he won an Academy Award for Best Actor in 1971 for The French Connection, playing Popeye Doyle. Classic movie. I'm curious, Ali, when did you first get exposed to Gene Hackman?
Lexi Luthor, bro. Yeah. I remember, so Superman, was so super, for lack of a better word. He was incredible, right? This guy's he's burning things with his eyeballs, man. He's flying. Come on. He's amazing. You just figured his major enemy, the villain, Lex Luthor, would be equally insane, and He really wasn't. I remember being kind of like first underwhelmed by Lex Luthor. This is casual dude just speaking in a normal accent. What's happening here? And then fascinated by him. There's very interesting choices that Gene Hackman, and I don't think I could articulate it in that way at the time, acting choices. I don't think I was talking about that, but I was fascinated by Lex Luthor. I just felt like this doesn't fit, and yet it's kind of amazing.
I rewatched some scenes the other day from Superman and Superman 2 especially, where Gene Hackman is playing off the trio from Krypton. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this guy is so good. He's so funny. He's so clever. And I mean, Lex Luthor is an interesting, even the idea of Lex Luthor is interesting, right? You have the all-powerful Superman. Let's create another villain who's super strong, as you said. But no, you do the opposite, right? Super smart, no superpowers, right? And you think, that seems unrealistic. A billionaire trying to take over the world, trying to get into the highest, levels of power. Seems craziness, right?
Oh my gosh.
Anyway.
Little did we know.
Yeah, exactly. So interestingly, Richard Donner wanted Gene Hackman to be in, and at that time, of course, Gene Hackman had a full head of hair. He still did up until his death, and had a mustache, though. He had a mustache for, again, most of his early roles in the 70s. And so Richard Donner convinced Gene Hackman to shave his mustache, because Richard Donner shaved his own mustache. So he said, okay, I'll do that. And then finally he said, I'll convince you at the very end of the film to wear a bald cap. As you remember, he takes off his hair, one of the last scenes when he's being arrested in the first Superman movie. And so I think it was great. He was in several of the sequels. He also did the voice of Nuclear Man in Superman 4, Quest for Peace. Not a good movie. He also, by the way, did the voice of God in Two of a Kind. Two of a Kind, the second major movie starring John Travolta and Olivia Newton-John after Grease. Not a good movie, but I did not.
Also not a good movie, exactly. So, must add that.
So I definitely agree with you. Superman is when I got exposed to Gene Hackman. That's on one of my top favorite roles of his. What else you got in terms of favorite roles for Gene Hackman?
Well, I loved him in Mississippi Burning, and I think I was halfway through the movie until I was like, wait, is this Lex Luthor?
Oh,
you know what I mean? Like it's such a different role. This guy's range was deeply impressive. And I mean, it was just incredible, and it's something worth rewatching. Alan Parker is the name of the director. I don't really know that name, and yet Alan Parker is a celebrated director, 17 different movies, but his name doesn't come up in conversation. But this is one of a number of movies that Gene Hackman did based on a true story. He is opposite Willem Dafoe. Frances McDormand is in this as well. I mean, it's incredible. And he was nominated for the Academy for Best Actor there, losing to his pal Dustin Hoffman for Rain Man. I mean, if you're going to lose to somebody, you lose to your buddy. That's the way to do it. But I was a massive fan of this film. And unfortunately, you made your allusions to old Muskie over there. And unfortunately, this story still stands the test of time. It would be great if we watched this. It was like, oh, that would never happen. Literally, a black man going for a jog was, chased by some guys in a pickup truck just a few years ago. Huge story, probably even more recently than that. But, sometimes at least those guys were stupid enough to film it and post it. So these kind of things are still happening. And this story is based on this deep South Ku Klux Klan run township where some people, they have this two opposite scenes. The first is this pursuit of this person on the road, and these Southerners, these three cars are chasing him and trying to kill him. And then after that, it's the point blank killing of a civil rights worker. It's really well shot. And I went back and watched some scenes from it, and I'm like, oh, I think this is like sit with the kids and watch this movie from the start properly. And by the way, you had mentioned Doyle, Popeye Doyle from that movie, The French Connection. Gene Hackman is basically reprising Popeye Dole, they say. He was more sort of pragmatic and more enlightened version of Popeye Dole, but it's an incredible performance. And Yeah, it's very, very well done. Following these two stories and then following Willem Dafoe and Gene Hackman both doing such a phenomenal job.
That's interesting because there's another movie he did with Will Smith in the 90s or early 2000s, Enemy of the State. I think it was in the 90s.
Yeah.
And he's apparently, they say he's kind of reprising his role from The Conversation from the 70s, even though so it's interesting how he did this. And so I want to talk a bit about some of these more villainous roles that he's done. Again, the ones that I think about from the 90s. Again, this is when I was really getting into film. So this is when Gene Hackman's performances are kind of burned into my brain. So No Way Out, great movie with Kevin Costner. Gene Hackman's in that. Crimson Tide. Man, I rewatched Crimson Tide the other day.
That's a good flick.
That is a good movie. It's very Tony Scott. It's the Tony Scott way of filming, but it's shortly after he did Top Gun. That is a great movie. Denzel Washington. Whew, I tell you, Ali, he's a good-looking man, especially back in the 90s. Crimson Tide, if people don't remember this movie, it's this U.S. nuclear sub, and they get an order perhaps to fire and release their nuclear weapons and essentially start World War III. And
perhaps, Asif?
And
perhaps?
And because the transmission is intercepted. And so they didn't get the full transmission. So they have to figure out, is this what's going on? And it's a conflict between the captain, Gene Hackman, and Denzel Washington's character. And also I found out Viggo Mortensen is in this, playing a key role. I did not even remember him being in this. Anyway, great movie. But when it comes to villains and villainous portrayals, again, we have Lex Luthor, again, we have Crimson Tide, but it's his role in Unforgiven, which I just, as Little Bill, the sheriff of this town. And Unforgiven is a great movie, one of my favorites. And it's just so good. Again, this movie is a complex movie, right? It's trying to reconcile the gunfighter from the old Sergio Leone movies that Clint Eastwood played, is indiscriminately killing people and dealing with that. And then Gene Hackman's character is a total, jerk. He's a horrible person, but he is trying to make sense of what's going on, right? I won't get into the plot of it, but he's trying to be rational in an evil world, but he himself ends up becoming quite evil. So a great performance. He won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor for Unforgiven. Very well deserved. So that's 2 Academy Awards he won, this and for The French Connection.
A little sales pitch on Little Bill from the internet. Little Bill greets an outlaw with a savage beating, regales and toys with a visiting writer, and wields his power over others through fear, cruelty, and bloodshed. You don't picture Gene Hackman's face when you picture somebody who would do that on paper. And yet he does a phenomenal job. He was so, so great in this movie. Yeah.
So what else do you got there, Ali, in terms of roles?
Oh, my friend, I got another little film that you may not have seen. I'm not sure. Do you ever see a little something called Hoosiers?
Hoosiers, you know what? I actually haven't seen Hoosiers, which my wife
I knew you hadn't, and that's why I asked. And I knew your wife had.
Yeah.
Because you're not a sports guy. So Roger Ebert had written about Hoosiers, and he said, I didn't know this about Roger Ebert. He said, I was a sports writer once for a couple of years in downstate Illinois. I covered mostly high school sports, and if I were a sports writer again, I'd want to cover them again. Imagine, of all the sports he would choose. So, because he talks about this passion to high school sports that transcends anything that comes after it. Nothing in pro sports equals the intensity of a very important high school basketball game, in this case. And your wife is a huge basketball fan. I know March Madness means a ton to her. So obviously she would have watched it. And as Canadians, we don't know this world of supremely important. We're sort of transcending reality, the reality that we know. You can go to a high school for 5 years in this country and never attend a sports game, which is inconceivable, right? With my cousins and family in the U.S., that's inconceivable. And of course, it's a David and Goliath story. It's a little team, that underdog that should not have been playing in the tournament that they're in against the teams that they're playing. Hoosiers also, it's a comeback movie, not just about the team, but about this city, this little town. It's the comeback of the coach, Gene Hackman himself. He should not be, he's too old, he's too experienced to be coaching in a little backwater town, but he's got his own backstory, something that he's sort of running from and trying to come to terms with. And the thing that I love, again, I watched a bunch of clips. It's also a comeback story of a guy named Shooter, who is the town drunk. He is invited by Gene Hackman to be the assistant coach. He's a basketball-loving drunk. He's the father of one of the kids on the team. And Gene Hackman says, you can be the assistant coach as long as you don't drink. It doesn't work, obviously. Okay. That never happened. However, you realize that's not really the point. The point was to make this drunk outcast feel like he's part of something. And that is something beautiful there. Who played the drunk, Asif? Who played the drunk? We've already mentioned his name.
I don't know.
Dennis Hopper.
Oh.
Isn't that fun, man?
Interesting.
Isn't that fun? Come on. That's amazing that they would get to work with each other. And Dennis Hopper, his supporting performance, won an Oscar nomination. So I don't know. Sit down with your kids. Watch this movie.
Okay. I will.
Monster.
Okay, so the last movie I want to talk about is The Royal Tenenbaums, 2001, Wes Anderson.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting. For Unforgiven, Clint Eastwood had to call Gene Hackman and convince him to do the role because Gene Hackman at that time had felt he'd done too many violent roles in his career and kind of wanted to get away from that. And of course, Unforgiven is an extremely violent movie. Royal Tenenbaums as well, he had to be convinced. In fact, Wes Anderson and Owen Wilson wrote this role with Gene Hackman in mind, kind of like without his permission or anything like that. They said, we want you for this. And he had to be convinced. A year and a half of wearing him down. And then once they got Hackman in, everybody else agreed to be. And again, people don't remember who's in this. Luke Wilson, Owen Wilson, Gwyneth Paltrow, Angelica Houston, Ben Stiller, so many great actors in this movie. And people might be surprised because I don't like Wes Anderson, but this movie is really good. I rewatched a couple of scenes. Oh my gosh, laughing out loud at this movie. It is great. And of course, he plays Royal Tenenbaum, who is again, a jerk, right? He stole from his kids. He basically abandoned his kids after he gets divorced from Angelica Houston's character. And then to reconcile with them, lies about having stomach cancer because now he's going broke as an adult. And, has this rivalry with Danny Glover. I can't even describe some of the scenes between those two. Hilarious. And it's a great role, very different from what he's done before. And again, that's, I think, what we're highlighting is just the breadth of his acting ability. It's funny, it's poignant. He is a jerk, but yet you kind of like it. I'm smiling when I'm rewatching a lot of the scenes with him and his grandsons in it. It's a good movie and probably the last great movie that he was in. And I'm glad that he got the opportunity to do this again. This is about 20 years ago, right? His last really big screen performance. And by the way, just as a quick aside, I know I don't like Wes Anderson movies. This is probably the last one I enjoyed. And I realized I really liked his first three movies, Bottle Rocket, Rushmore, and The Royal Tenenbaums. I'm like, why didn't I like his movies afterwards? By the way, I'll leave a little quiz for you.
Oh, yeah.
I alluded to it a second ago, but all three of those movies were co-written by
Owen Wilson? Luke Wilson?
Exactly. Owen Wilson. And I'm like, and then afterwards, how many of Wes Anderson's movies were co-written by Owen Wilson?
Can I guess zero?
Zero. So I'm like, I think it's because I like Owen Wilson's writing better than Wes Anderson's. That's my theory. We'll see. But yeah, so Royal Tenenbaums, the last one I'm going to mention in terms of really amazing film roles for Gene Hackman.
I'm going to mention one last one, which I'm almost angry right now at you, Asif, because I know you haven't seen this movie. And you just talked about the acting tour de force, which is The Royal Tenenbaums. However, you absolute ding-dong, you got to watch the movie The Birdcage.
Yeah.
It's almost unfair to single out Gene Hackman here because Robin Williams and Nathan Lane are so unbelievable in this movie. Hank Azaria is fantastic. Very, very memorable. Also, Gene Hackman, his wife is played by Diane Wiest. Is it West? Is it West? But it's spelled Wiest. God, they're so good together. And Mike Nichols, baby.
Oh, yeah.
Mike Nichols directed it. So if you don't know about The Birdcage, I encourage you to just do a tiny little dive into it. It comes from the French La Cage aux Folles. I think it was a late 70s film about, somebody with a character with a gay father who he goes, can you please just pretend to be not gay for a few days when you meet my, conservative girlfriend, and antics ensue. And it's set in this live entertainment venue that is burlesque and very queer friendly, more than friendly, queer loving, The owners are two men. Obviously, one of them is the star of the show. That's played by Nathan Lane in this movie. The only weak link was actually the guy himself, the son, who asks his dad. It was Dan Futterman. Dan Futterman didn't have much of a career. He did a few things. I don't know what happened to Dan. He was definitely a weak link. You know who else is in it? I can't remember her name right now. Ali McBeal. Ali McBeal plays Gene Hackman's daughter.
Flockhart.
Flockhart, for God's sake. How can I forget her name?
The current partner of?
Johnny Flockhart?
Harrison
That
Ford.
doesn't make sense. Harrison Ford. You're telling me Harrison Ford is dating Callista Flockhart?
Yeah. They might even be married. Yeah.
Oh my God. I had no idea about this. Okay. That's a 50-year age difference. Anyway, Gene Hackman plays this conservative senator. He's the leader of the Coalition for Moral Order. We have seen many versions of this person in the U.S. He thinks that the Pope is too controversial and Billy Graham is too liberal. That's very, very funny. He's just fantastic. He comes in, he's in a state of chaos because one of his close friends, a close colleague of his, who's also a senator, just died in bed with an underage prostitute. And then and she was black. Oh God, she was black. It's just, the worst nightmare for him. And so he comes there to this nightclub in Miami, not understanding what he's coming to, but he thinks that his right-wing constituents will be happy because he's promoting family values because his daughter will be with his family and they'll get married. And in fact, it's even worse for his reputation. But those two, you're opposite Nathan Lane and Robin Williams. Mm-hmm. Imagine how strong you have to be to hold your own. Exactly. And Gene Hackman and Diane Weiss do a phenomenal job. They're just really so good. I mean, I'm going to watch that with the kids as soon as possible. I can't talk about this anymore without watching it again. I think we might even own it. Get off your butt there, buddy, and watch this movie, for God's sake, Asif.
So just to wrap up this section, Gene Hackman retired officially around 2004 from acting. He just didn't find that there was a lot of roles that were interesting to him. His doctor said, you're under a lot of stress. Maybe you should just take a step back. So that's why he hadn't really done anything in about 20 years. But the last piece of trivia for this section is the last televised appearance was in Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives with Guy Fieri. Fieri went to a Santa Fe diner and Hackman was eating there. I'm not really sure the details of that. Was that a coincidence or whatever happened? But
what I know about food shows, nothing is a coincidence. Maybe they go there and they go, oh my God, you won't believe who's here. Gene Hackman is here. Oh, let's ask him if he could. You know what I mean? Right. But even that, I don't believe. I think they would have had that. Well,
people can try and search for that online, but probably better just look at some of these movies we talked about.
Yeah, really after everything we just talked about, you're not going to go to Guy Fieri, for God's sake. Exactly. This is a terrible idea.
Definitely check out some of these movies we spoke about, but we're going to transition now to the next section talking about his untimely death.
Yes, not only an untimely death, also tragic, and also what I would call, knowing nothing about this particular virus that we're about to talk about, also very bizarre. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Right? So, Asif, maybe you can go through the details about what we now know as fact. It's accepted. There was a point where it was it wasn't clear what happened. Because when one person's dead and their partner is also dead and there's pills lying on the floor,
right? So
immediately start thinking murder, suicide, and all that. So why don't you walk us through this thing?
Yeah. So his wife, who was quite a bit younger than him, Betsy Arakawa, she was, as you said, also found dead. There's also a dog that was found dead. So people were all suspicious about what was going on, as you mentioned. But this is essentially the timeline of what we know today as we're recording this. So Mrs. Arakawa was really the primary caregiver for Gene Hackman. Gene Hackman was 95 years old, believed to have had advanced Alzheimer's disease. So
primary caregiver and also his partner, his wife.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, yeah.
But as often happens, if you have someone with dementia or a chronic medical illness, one partner can often become the caregiver. And so it seems like she died first on February 11th. That left Gene Hackman alone in the house, they estimate, for about a week, and they think he died on February 18th. That's from looking at his pacemaker, and we've done an episode on pacemakers quite recently. So, and then you can interrogate the pacemaker and find out when someone may have passed away. And then their bodies, unfortunately, not discovered for another 8 days after that because a maintenance worker called because they came to the house, nobody answered. And then they found Mrs. Arakawa, who's only 65, so she's 30 years his junior. So, again, 65 is not that old. She was found in the bathroom, pills spilled everywhere from a medicine bottle. And they had 3 dogs, 2 which were able to roam the property in the house were alive. I'm presuming because even that time they were able to find some food. But one of them had just had surgery and was in a crate. And so that dog passed away because they didn't have access to any food or water. So very disturbing because then you think, oh my gosh, so Mr. Hackman, Gene, he was alone for 7 days perhaps in a confused state with dementia, perhaps not able to feed himself. Again, it's just conjecture. And then, I don't know, it's quite sad to think about his potential last days. And of course, as you alluded to, they found later that Miss Arakawa died from this hantavirus infection, which affected her lungs. And so the whole thing is just, as you said, quite disturbing, quite concerning in terms of what happened in the days leading up to each of their deaths.
Okay, so let's go into this virus that I'm going to say confidently the vast majority of humans have never heard of, the Hantavirus.
Yeah.
And let's talk about its connections to rodent droppings and if it necessarily needs to be connected to that also.
Yeah, I mean, it is usually a virus carried by rodents. It doesn't have to be, but in most of the world, that's who carries it.
Not all rodents have it.
No, definitely not.
No,
so
okay.
Let's just talk about Canada, because I think that's what people are most interested in. It's found in the deer mouse, the white-footed mouse, and the red-backed vole, V-O-L-E. And I didn't think you thought we'd be talking about voles, but here we are talking about voles. So it's found in North America. In Canada, it's mainly in the western provinces. In the U.S., it's more in the southern states, including California, a lot in South America, and then, of course, in Europe as well. And it's a bit different how the different presentations of disease, depending on where you are. The virus that is found, the type of virus, the name of the hantavirus that causes this disease in North America is called the sin nombre virus.
Sin nombre means without name in Spanish.
Which is interesting. Like, why is that the name? But
just give it a name. You give all kinds of stupid names to all kinds of other things.
So that's the specific form of hantavirus that causes this in North America. So you can get it. So it doesn't cause disease in the rodents. So they just carry it and then they excrete it, and that's it. They're fine. Oh. They won't have any symptoms. It's not like you're going to find dead rats or mice in your house, and that's a clue that you have it. That's not the way it works. But if you touch objects that have been contaminated with an infected rodent, their feces or urine, then you could get it. Or eat food.
Even just the hand contact, or then your hand has to touch just on your hand, just on your skin.
Yes, yeah. Or from a rodent bite. That's actually apparently not very common. I'll put some links to some articles that you guys can read about it. But yeah.
And so speaking of commonality, I don't think you've mentioned yet how common this is.
I haven't. So really, it's only in the early 1990s that we started keeping track of cases of hantavirus in North America. So in 2022, there was a survey that was done in the US, and there were 864 cases that were found since we started keeping track in the early 90s.
Okay.
And in Canada, there have been 163 cases in about the same time period. But 34 people have died in Canada over the past 3 decades. So,
okay, I take back my earlier statement. There might be more than a few handfuls of people who've heard of this virus.
I mean, it's funny you mentioned that. I heard about it, but that's all. It's just something I've heard of in the past. But it definitely can kill people, for sure. And, people like, okay, who would get this? Like you're saying it occurs in Western Canada. The classic thing is you have visited a rural cabin that has a rodent infestation, maybe said, oh, this is gross, let's clean up a little bit here. And then, and we don't know anything about Gene Hackman in his house, whether there were rodent droppings. None of this has come out, so we don't actually know what happened.
Architectural Digest, for God's sake.
Exactly. And it was apparently a very nice house they lived in, so I don't know about that, but that's the classic cases, cleaning up a cottage or cabin, after the winter, and then you get infected.
Got it. And of course, mice can appear anywhere, no matter how no matter what kind of home you have. No judgment. What are the symptoms? You said there were, in the US and Canada, there's probably, my math's not great, but about 5 times the number of people have it or get infected with it than die. What are those symptoms that people present when they go to the hospital with that they know they've got something going on?
Yes, about 1 to 8 weeks after exposure, you'll start developing signs of the infection. So there can be a delay, right?
Wow.
So you may not associate it with it. And you get flu-like symptoms. So fever, chills, maybe shortness of breath, just feeling unwell. So you think you have like the quote unquote flu, right? But then things after a few weeks of that can become more serious. And in kind of North America, you get what's called the Hantavirus pulmonary syndrome, which is what Mrs. Arakawa had, where you get lung type symptoms. So not just the fatigue, muscle pain, headache, nausea, but you progress to difficulty with breathing. And that can be extremely serious, requiring you to go to the intensive care unit. And so again, this is pure conjecture, Ali. I don't know anything about this, but you can imagine if you're caring for someone who you love, who's your partner, you don't want to leave them, right? So even if you're feeling unwell, you get this flu-like illness, you're like, yeah, but I'm not going to go to the hospital. I'm not going to go to the doctor. I got to take care of this person, right? So perhaps people may ignore their symptoms. Again, pure conjecture. There's zero evidence of this, but I'm
of course. But you're tapping into the caregiver mentality, right? You often become a sort of a martyr, and at some level, I've known this from many different cases. And doctors will often say, don't forget to take care of yourself, right? Because you're going to lose yourself with somebody else and you yourself will get sick and then you will not be of any use to the person you're supposed to care for. So yeah, I've heard these things before and people close to me, and I don't think your conjecture is too off base.
And so I mentioned there's another kind of form. So affecting the lungs is how this North American kind of form presents when you get the hantavirus infection. Often in Europe and other countries, you get kidney failure. So that's called a renal syndrome when you get kidney failure. So it can be different. And so you just need to keep in mind that it can present in these different ways. Like I said, in Europe and Asia, it's more of a kidney infection. Now, the hantavirus strain in the US and Canada has a 38 to 50% mortality rate if you get infected with it. So not good odds.
Not good. And obviously that delay is so tricky in the diagnosis, right? While you're trying to, I don't remember what I did this morning and it's still morning, dude. Yeah. This is crazy. This is to go back weeks to be like, what else did I do? Well,
yeah, exactly. So it can be difficult to be diagnosed. So they say that doctors should consider it in any patients who have had a recent travel to an area where you can get hantavirus infection. Again, that involves you knowing which areas are involved, who have headache, that muscle pain, maybe you have some vomiting or diarrhea, but that's so non-specific, right? But obviously if they progress to have those things and breathing problems or kidney failure, that would make you suspicious. But there is one thing on blood tests that can give a clue. So in our blood, we have different cells, right? We have our red blood cells, right? We're hemoglobin. And then we have our white blood cells that fight infection, but we also have platelets. And platelets are responsible for blood clotting. Okay, so you can have a decrease in your platelet count. So that's the clue for doctors when they're doing their routine blood test. If you have these symptoms and decreased platelets, and then you could have excessive bleeding, because of that, that could be a clue that you might have a hantavirus infection. But you really have to have what's called in medicine a high index of suspicion. You need to think about it in order to be able to diagnose. And then, of course, remember, this was only diagnosed with Betsy Arakawa on autopsy.
Sure. Yeah. After she had died. If you present with it, what are the treatment options?
There's no specific treatments. Sometimes they'll use antiviral drugs, but there's only a few case reports. I couldn't find a lot of solid literature on that, but you need to often go to the intensive care unit, get intubated, oxygenated, medications to help your blood pressure, and sometimes even like a type of bypass machine to help your lungs function. So yeah, and that's why it's so serious, because there's no real good treatment other than what we call supportive care in an intensive care unit.
Prevention, besides not picking up rodent droppings with your bare hands, what else can you do here to...
Listen, so what's advised is if you live in an endemic area where they have this, and you're opening a cabin, cottage, a trailer. Lots of people have trailers, especially in Canada, that's been closed for the winter. You need to air it out. Wear a mask. People suggest an N95 mask. Okay. And we all know what N95 masks are now after COVID.
Sure.
And
They are things that will have a few people in the streets yelling, "Sheep! You're sheep!
Oh, God. Okay.
They don't work!" That's what they are. That's also what they are.
So, yeah. And then, so wear these things when cleaning any mouse waste that you might see. You can use bleach or commercial disinfectant and let it sit for several minutes, and then wipe the area with paper towels, throw that in the garbage.
Okay.
And then they say don't use, by the way, a vacuum or broom, because that could stir up the aerosols. And we said you can get it from inhalation or touching it.
I mean, after listening to this, I'd probably wear a hazmat suit. I'd forget the mask. I would go full orange.
Ali would
hazmat.
just sell whatever cottage that he had.
Yeah, just light it on fire.
Yeah, so it is concerning. So again, prevention is probably the best method to try and address this. But there's one thing I wanted to mention just in the last few minutes, Ali, and I think we alluded to it before, and that's this idea of caregiver burnout, right? And I think it's something that we have to think about as people are living longer. More and more cases of dementia. We've done episodes on Alzheimer's disease and other forms of dementia in the past. And I think there's a real danger. It's something to learn from this case. When there's only one person doing all the caregiving, what happens when the caregiver, as you said, needs care, right? And what happened to that? And you see people who try and function. And again, Ali, you and I are of the age where lots of our parents or our friends' parents were in this situation. And, someone's doing all the care for someone else, and then something happens to that individual. Then what do? And it's like a house of cards that can just fall apart.
Oh, God, yeah.
So I think we need to be thinking about the mental health and the well-being of the caregivers and giving them respite and giving them backup and having other people checking in and, spelling these people off so it's not such a burden.
And when you say other people, just considering people's finances and means, do we mean a neighbor, sibling, friend, as well as, if possible, a healthcare?
All those things. And it is, definitely family and friends, but it is possible to get help. You don't need help sometimes 24 hours a day, but even just for like several hours, several times a week, it's possible. One of my friends, Ali, who, her mother has dementia, but her mother lives in a different city, and she was able, it's a lot of work, but she was able to get almost round the clock care for her mother living on her own, not in a nursing home, and the vast majority publicly funded, through the government. But it just takes a lot of work, a lot of phone calls, a lot of waiting lists to get these things. But it is possible, especially in Canada.
Okay. Good little message at the end, man.
So that's our episode for today. Let us know what you guys thought about the episode. Again, anything we missed in the career retrospective of Gene Hackman. Again, Ali and I have our biases just in terms of when we saw most of his movies. For us, it was the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. So a lot of the movies we're talking about are from that time period. Obviously, he had huge movies in the 70s as well. But let us know. drvcomedian@gmail.com, Dr. V Comedian on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky. We are everywhere. We really got to leave Twitter. I don't know what the hell we're doing there, but
I know. Same. On a personal note, I got to leave Twitter as well. What am I doing there?
Ridiculous. But anyway, let us know. Maybe let us know if we should leave Twitter on Twitter. Let us know. Send us a DM on that. We'd be very curious.
Get out of here. Go back to where you came from.
Let us know about the Hantavirus thing. I think it's something that people were wondering about. Basically, Ali texted me saying, what happened? What's going on? What is this virus? And so we thought it would be a good topic for this episode. Ali, what you got going on? We're talking end of March and then April.
I'm going to be in Victoria, BC. You ever been? Beautiful.
I love
Victoria.
That place. Love
that place. Laugh Out Loud, CBC Radio's Laugh Out Loud show that I host. Will be there doing a live recording at the end of March at a place called Heckler's. Probably one of the top 3 comedy clubs in this country.
Is it? Despite the name.
Despite the most terrible name. Yes. It's you're inviting trouble then.
Yeah, I mean.
Come on, what are you kicking me out for? It's called Heckler's.
What's the analogy? It's having a place that has heavy metal, hard rock concerts and calling it Induce Riot or something. I don't know.
Yeah. A restaurant called Poison. Come to poison.
Food poisoning.
What, did you think there was poison here? Why would you think that? It's so weird. Anyway, it doesn't matter. One of the greatest clubs. People do not act. I mean, they're just the best audiences somehow. There's some reverse psychology working there.
Yeah.
And then for April, I'm in a writing room for a project that I'm on, and a little bit of as much comedy as I can do. So standupali.com is the way to
writing room.
find
We want
out.
to hear more about that as you are able to tell us more about these exciting projects. But just remember that although I'm a doctor, I'm not your doctor. Medical issues we talk about are for your interest and information only, and they're not medical advice. Please consult your medical professionals for actual medical advice. Thanks for listening.
Bye-bye.